Tonight I'm going to share some personal stories about my family. I hope that you can learn from the experiences that through family values and how we celebrate diversity. So about 15% of new marriages are interracial, and I'm proud to be part of that 15%. My husband Jason and I have been married for over 10 years. And, over those years, we've had our share of unsolicited comments about our relationship. One of the most frequently asked questions is, why'd you marry him? Couldn't you find somebody of your own race? Ouch, okay. But I think one of the most memorable comments that I heard was when I was interviewing for a job in Terre Haute, Indiana, and the waitress at the local Denny's, she came up to me and she said, "Oh my goodness, I love the interracials." The interracials? Really? Needless to say, we did not move to Terre Haute, Indiana. Instead, we both landed jobs at U of I, our alma mater, and so we were very excited because the environment was a lot more inclusive and welcoming, and so we bought a house and we made some babies. But before I even gave birth to the children, people kept telling me about how beautiful they would be. I mean, they would have that good hair, that curly hair, and they would have beautiful complexions, and I was like, okay, I know my kids are kind of cute, but when they came out, I don't know, it was kind of iffy there. But I didn't know how to respond when they would say, "Mixed babies are the most beautiful babies, don't you agree?" And I was like, yeah. So finally, I realized that, I just kind of nod and say, "Thank you. Aren't all babies beautiful?" Yeah. But over and over again, I would hear that and I would say, "Stop fetishizing about all those mixed racial babies." So not only were people providing comments for me and my husband about our relationship, but they started to give those comments to my children. And I remember my oldest son, wasn't even 3 yet, and he was playing at the park. Kids play at the park. He wasn't at co-op, but he was playing. And someone came up to him, a kid a bit older, and said, "What are you?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And so my son had the perfect response. He said, "I'm Nicholas. I think you mean, who are you?" And he's very articulate for his age. So I, from that point, knew that we needed to have a game plan for how was I going to preserve their innocence and their hope for the world, but I also wanted to teach them about their racial identity and some of the prejudices that they might encounter. So if someone had this thing where, you have those boxes you need to check, if you had to check one box for race, what was I going to tell my kids to check? So my family, they said, "Well, of course, you're going to tell them to check black." And I was like, yeah. I was wary because I'm hesitant when kids are multicultural and interracial. You want to embrace both those things because you need to embrace all the parts of your identity. If you don't, you're going to be really, I wouldn't say screwed up, but you might have some identity cultures issues later. So I wanted them to self-identify. So I started to kind of tell them they're biracial, and they kind of got it. And then I really knew it got hit home when my oldest was in our therapy class, and he said he was making a self-portrait, and he said, "Mommy, can you pass me the biracial crayon?" And I was like, "What?" I'm like, I was like, first and foremost, you better mix those crayons together. I'm not paying extra money for multicultural crayons. However, I was so happy that he was starting to become his own and really kind of doing that. So I started to explain how race, and I was like, "Oh, race is a social construct." And then he was like, and I was like, okay. So I started to get more age-appropriate things. So I started to get books where he could identify himself, and he saw people that were of all colors and things of that nature. So, but I still wanted to give him more about some of my traditions. So my father was very pro-black and very like, "Oh my goodness, you need to know everything about Black history." Like every day it was like, "Who do you know invented that?" I was like, And we celebrated Kwanzaa and all these other things, and so I make sure to introduce that to my children. But at the same time, I want my husband's traditions to be there. So of course, winter sports, we go sledding with our kids. We're in the Midwest, and stereotypical, but that was one of his traditions. But I don't get bothered anymore when I go into a place and I'm with my kids and they go, "Oh, cute kids, cute." I was like, "Yeah, who are there? Who kids are those?" And I'm like, oh, they're mine. And they're like, oh, well, they don't look like you. And I'm like, really? But I smile and say, thank you for the compliment. Or when my husband's out grocery shopping and he's with my daughter and the cashier might say, oh, she's so cute. What's her name? And she'll respond, Akila. And they'll go, oh, who named her? And instead of thinking that, we nod, we smile, we say thank you. So I want to communicate for the most part that parents, you always want to say how kids are all great. And unfortunately, I hear a lot of people that say that color doesn't matter. Well, color does matter. It's actually very important that you don't grow up colorblind because it can be so damaging, especially to people of color. If they find out that color matters, it's harder much later on. So what we teach our children is to love their differences and be happy of those differences and to be proud of who they are, because our differences and our diversity, that's what makes us unique and the true thing that we all have in common. So I want everyone to just take the experiences that we've learned about how we celebrate and we value everybody's differences and share it on. So that's my story about my family, and thanks, everybody.